That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The cold wind whipped across the training grounds of Sennybridge, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and pine from the Brecon beacons beyond. It was a typical Welsh morning in late autumn, the sort where the sky hung low and grey, threatening rain that never quite fell. Private Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the drill square, her boots sinking slightly into the sodden grass as the company formed up for the morning's exercise. At 5'2", she was the smallest in her platoon, her frame slight beneath the standard-issue combat jacket that seemed to swallow her whole. The others towered around her, lanky lads from Manchester and sturdy Geordies, all fresh-faced and eager to prove themselves in the infantry training centre. Sergeant Major Hargrove's voice cut through the murmur like a bayonet. "Right, you lot, fall in properly. This isn't a bleeding picnic." His clipped tone echoed off the low barracks buildings, the parade square a vast expanse of cracked tarmac, bordered by Nissen huts, painted in faded olive drab. Hargrove was a veteran of the regiment's selection process, though he'd washed out years ago. Now he lorded over the recruits with the bitterness of one who knew just how unforgiving the life could be. His eyes scanned the ranks, lingering on Elena with the faintest curl of disdain. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, shoulders squared, chin level. Silence was her armor. The company was a mix. Privates like Elena, still green despite their 6 months in, lance corporals barking orders to assert their stripes, and the odd corporal overseeing kit checks. Roll call had come and gone without incident. The names read out in that rhythmic monotone that bound them all to the chain of command. Elena's response, "Present, Sergeant," had been as crisp as any, but she'd caught the snickers from the back row. "Vasquez? More like Vasweek," one of the privates had muttered under his breath during last week's tab, loud enough for half the section to hear. She hadn't reacted then, and she wouldn't now. Her dark hair was pulled tight under her beret, her posture impeccable, betraying nothing of the fire that simmered beneath. Today's drill was straightforward, a forced march to the hills, testing endurance on the uneven terrain that mimicked the Afghan ridges or the Iraqi deserts they'd one day face. The kit was heavy, 60 pounds of Bergen, rifles slung across the chest, water bottles clinking with each step. Elena adjusted her straps without a word, her movements efficient, born of repetition. She'd joined up straight from a council estate in Birmingham, the daughter of Spanish immigrants who scrubbed floors to keep the lights on. The army had promised structure, purpose, a way out, but purpose came with its own trials, especially when your size marked you as the easy target. As the platoon shuffled into line, Lance Corporal Wilkins sidled up beside her, his broad frame casting a shadow. Wilkins was Hargrove's shadow, a bully with ambitions, always quick with a jab to elevate himself. "Oi, Vaz, you reckon you'll make it to the first checkpoint without me carrying you?" His voice was low, laced with that false camaraderie that masked contempt. A few heads turned, chuckles rippling through the ranks like wind over barley. Eleanor didn't flinch. She met his eyes for a fraction of a second, steady, unyielding, then looked forward again. "I'll manage, Corporal," she replied, her accent carrying the soft lilt of the Midlands, polite but firm. Hargrove blew his whistle, and the column lurched forward, boots thudding in unison against the gravel path that led from the square towards the open moorland. The air was crisp, biting at exposed skin, the distant call of a crow, the only sound beyond the creak of equipment, and the occasional cough from a smoker in the rear. Eleanor fell into step, her pace measured, breathing controlled. She was no stranger to the weight. Nights spent in the gym, pushing limits others dismissed as impossible for someone her size. But here, in the rigid hierarchy of the British Army, competence alone wasn't enough. You had to fit the mold, tall, broad, unbreakable. Or so they thought. The march wound uphill, the ground turning to mud underfoot, sucking at their souls. Conversation died as the incline steepened, replaced by the labored rhythm of exertion. Elena's mind drifted, as it often did on these tabs, to the life before enlistment. The simulations in basic had been child's play compared to what she'd known, but that was a door firmly shut. No one needed to know about the civilian contractor days. the brief stint in logistics support during a deployment she couldn't discuss. It was all classified, buried under non-disclosure agreements thicker than her Bergen straps. Here she was just Private Vasquez, the quiet one, the small one, the one they overlooked. Half a mile in, the crack appeared. Wilkins, lagging deliberately to stay near her, accidentally nudged her elbow as they navigated a narrow gate. Her Bergen shifted, the strap catching on the latch, and for a heartbeat, she stumbled. The platoon halted briefly, eyes on her. "Steady on, Vaz. Don't want you face-planting before breakfast," Wilkins called out, his laugh drawing more from the others. Hargrove glanced back, his face impassive, but he didn't intervene. It was the way of things, pecking order enforced through subtle barbs testing who would break first. Eleanor righted herself without a word, wiping mud from her knee. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her eyes remained forward, fixed on the horizon where the beacons rose like silent sentinels. The wind picked up, carrying the faint patter of rain now, misting their faces. She lengthened her stride, overtaking Wilkins without acknowledgement, her boots striking the earth with quiet determination. The platoon reformed, the moment passing like so many before it. But in the chill air, amid the echo of disciplined steps, something shifted, a subtle defiance unspoken, waiting for its moment. As they crested the first rise, the base shrinking behind them, Elena allowed herself a single internal breath of resolve. Orders were orders, but right was right, and in the Army's unyielding world, the line between them was thinner than a razor wire. The platoon pressed on through the thickening mist, the path narrowing as it snaked between gorse bushes heavy with dew. Sennybridge's training area stretched out like a vast, unforgiving canvas, the Brecon beacons looming in the distance under a canopy of slate-grey clouds. Private Elena Vasquez kept her position in the file, her Bergen a familiar burden that settled into her shoulders without complaint. The weight pulled at her, but she adjusted with a subtle shift, redistributing the load through core and legs, a technique honed in silence, away from prying eyes. Around her, the rhythm of the march held steady, the thud of boots on uneven turf, the faint jingle of webbing, the occasional sharp intake of breath from those unaccustomed to the pull of the hills. Sergeant Major Hargrove led from the front, his pace unrelenting, a figure carved from the same granite as the landscape. He'd served 2 tours in Helmand, or so the whispers went, before the grind of command posts grounded him here, shaping raw recruits into something resembling soldiers. Behind him marched Corporal Ellis, a wiry Scotsman with the steady gaze of one who'd seen enough to know when to speak and when to hold his tongue. Ellis was fair in his way, quick to correct a sloppy rifle sling, but blind to the undercurrents of resentment that festered in the ranks. Lance Corporal Wilkins, however, thrived on those currents, his steps deliberately heavy as he trailed Elena, waiting for another opening. The hierarchy was etched into every movement, every glance. Privates like Elena and young Davies from Liverpool formed the base, their voices muted unless called upon. Lance corporals such as Wilkins bridged the gap, enforcing orders with the zeal of the newly promoted. Corporals like Ellis oversaw the sections, their nods of approval carrying more weight than praise. And Hargrove, with his sergeant's stripes and major's bearing, was the unyielding spine, his word law, his silence a judgment. It was the British way, order imposed through ritual, discipline woven into the fabric of the day. No one questioned it. To do so invited the quiet retribution of the chain. As the ground leveled out onto a plateau of heather-strewn moor, Hargrove called a halt for the first inspection. "Form up. Kit check now." The command rippled down the line, and the platoon dropped Bergens in a neat row, rifles grounded beside them. Eleanor knelt swiftly, unpacking her load with precision. Rations first, then poncho, spare socks folded just so. Her hands moved without flourish, each item placed for Hargrove's scrutiny. The air carried the earthy tang of peat, mingled with the faint metallic scent of gun oil from the SA-80s propped nearby. Rain began to spit now, fine droplets that beaded on berets and darkened the shoulders of jackets. Hargrove paced the line, his boots leaving shallow prints in the soft ground. He paused at Davies, tugging at a loose strap. "Sloppy, Private. Do it again." Davies flushed, fumbling to retie it under the sergeant's glare. Next came Wilkins, whose kit gleamed with overzealous polish. Hargrove gave a curt nod, moving on. When he reached Elena, his eyes narrowed slightly, taking in her diminutive form crouched amid the gear. "Vasquez, Bergen secure?" She stood, snapping to attention, her response immediate and even. "Yes, Sergeant Major. All in order." He prodded the pack with his toe, testing the balance, then grunted approval, though the flicker in his expression suggested it was given grudgingly. She was competent, aye, but competence in a frame like hers invited doubt. In the army, size mattered, or so the old hands believed. It shaped how you carried the line, how you held in the face of fire. The inspection complete, Hargrove signaled to reform, but as Elena shouldered her Bergen, Wilkins leaned in close, his voice a murmur lost in the shuffle. "Neat as a pin, eh, Vaz? Bet you pack your knickers the same way." A snort from Private Thompson nearby, quickly stifled, as Ellis shot them a warning look. Elena's face remained impassive, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the mist clung to the ridges. She didn't rise to it. Words were ammunition best saved. Instead, she hoisted her load and stepped off, her stride unbroken, pulling ahead of the cluster that dawdled behind. The march resumed, the path dipping into a shallow valley where a stream gurgled over stones, its banks slick with moss. Here the routine shifted to section drills, Hargrove barking orders for fire team formations, testing reactions on the move. "Enemy contact, left flank, move!" The platoon fanned out instinctively, Elena dropping to a knee behind a low outcrop, her rifle trained forward. Her breathing stayed even, fingers steady on the grip, scanning the empty hillside, as if threat lay hidden in every shadow. She'd run these scenarios 100 times, her mind mapping angles before the others had settled. Thompson, paired with her, hesitated a beat too long, his position exposed. "Cover your arc, Private," she said quietly, her tone neither sharp nor pleading, just fact. He adjusted, mumbling thanks, but the moment passed unmarked by the others. By midday, the platoon reached the first checkpoint, a windswept crossroads marked by a weathered signpost. The camp's cookhouse wagon parked nearby for a brief brew-up. Steam rose from billy cans as the lads gathered, shaking out limbs and sharing drags from illicit cigs. The mess was makeshift. Tin mugs of scalding tea, biscuits doled out by the quartermaster's assistant, a lance corporal with a ledger. Elena accepted her mug without fanfare, sipping the bitter liquid that warmed her from within. The rain had eased, leaving the air heavy and cool, the scent of wet wool pervasive. Conversation turned to gripes, the tab's length, the sergeant's pace, the endless grey of Wales. Wilkins, lounging against a rucksack, couldn't resist. "Vasquez, you look knackered already. Sure you don't need a piggyback?" Laughter erupted from his mates, Hargrove out of earshot conferring with Ellis. Eleanor set her mug down carefully, her posture straight as she met Wilkins' gaze, brief, unblinking, before turning to refill her water bottle from the stream. "I'm fine, Corporal," she replied, voice level, carrying on as if he'd commented on the weather. The dismissal landed softly, but it stung Wilkins. His grin faltered, replaced by a scowl. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, sensing the undercurrent, but said nothing. In the rigid order of ranks, mockery was a tool, but silence could disarm it. Hargrove's whistle cut the break short. "On your feet! Second leg, double time." The platoon reformed, the hierarchy reasserting itself in the snap of salutes and the clatter of gear. Eleanor fell in, her silent competence a quiet counterpoint to the banter around her. She was the underestimated one, the small figure in the line, mocked for what she lacked in stature but overlooked for what she held in reserve. The beacons waited ahead, their peaks shrouded, much like the past she carried unspoken. In the Army's unyielding routine, such secrets were luxuries few afforded, but Elena Vasquez had learned to bear them, just as she bore the weight on her back. As the column crested the valley's rim, the wind returned, carrying the distant rumble of thunder over the moors. The day stretched on, routine unbroken, but beneath the surface, the subtle tensions simmered, the order of things tested, not yet broken. The platoon pushed deeper into the heart of the training area, the path twisting through a labyrinth of low hills where the gorse gave way to open expanses of bracken, brittle and browned by the season. The air grew heavier with the promise of more rain, the clouds pressing down like a sergeant's unrelenting gaze. Private Elena Vasquez maintained her rhythm, her boots finding purchase on the uneven ground with a precision that belied her size. The Bergen rode high on her back, its straps biting into her shoulders, but she welcomed the discomfort. It sharpened focus, drowned out the murmurs that trailed her like exhaust fumes. Sergeant Major Hargrove set a punishing pace, his silhouette cutting through the mist ahead, flanked by Corporal Ellis, who relayed adjustments with terse nods. The hierarchy hummed along. Lance Corporal Wilkins barking at the stragglers to close up, Private Davies wiping sweat from his brow and shooting envious glances at those who seemed untouched by the grind. Elena was among them, her breathing steady, face set in that mask of quiet endurance. She'd run farther tabs than this in her mind, mapping routes through memories she kept locked away, nights in the Welsh mountains under different skies, different stakes. But here, in the daylight of routine, she was just another private, her competence noted, but not valued. The second checkpoint loomed, a makeshift bivouac site near the edge of a shallow ravine where the quartermaster had set up for the midday meal. Tents sagged under guy ropes, and the smell of boiling stew wafted from a field kitchen, mingling with the damp rot of leaf litter. Hargrove called the halt with a sharp whistle, and the column collapsed into controlled chaos. Bergen dropped, rifles stacked, men stretching limbs grown stiff from the march. 10 minutes for scoff, then weapons drill. No slacking, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. The platoon dispersed to the trestle tables, tin trays clattering as they queued for the ration packs, bully beef hash, hard biscuits, and mugs of lukewarm tea that tasted of tannin and earth. Elena joined the line, her tray balanced lightly in one hand, the other adjusting her cuff against the chill. The queue shuffled forward, banter rising in pockets, complaints about the weather, boasts about weekend leave. Wilkins fell in behind her, his presence a deliberate intrusion, close enough that his elbow brushed hers. "Vasquez, you eat like a bird too. No wonder you're all skin and bones," he said, loud enough for the section ahead to turn. A ripple of chuckles followed, Private Thompson joining in with a half-hearted guffaw before catching Ellis's eye and falling silent. Eleanor kept her gaze on the server doling out portions, her response a mere incline of her head. "Sustains me, Corporal," she said evenly, accepting her tray without flourish. The trestle was crowded, benches slick with condensation. Elena slid onto one end, away from the cluster, but Wilkins followed, plonking his tray opposite with enough force to slop stew onto the wood. Others piled in around them, Davies, Thompson, a couple of other privates eager for the warmth of company. The meal began in earnest, spoons scraping against metal, the low hum of conversation filling the space. Hargrove and Ellis ate apart, reviewing maps under a tarp, their backs to the group, enforcing the divide between command and ranks. It started small, as these things often did, a nudge under the table, Wilkins' boot tapping hers, accidentally. Elena shifted away, focusing on her food, but he persisted, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial tone that invited complicity. "Come on, Vaz, lighten up, we're all mates here. Or are you too posh for us now?" The words hung, baiting her, and when she didn't bite, he escalated. As she reached for her mug, his hand shot out, grabbing her sleeve at the wrist, yanking it just enough to upend the tray. The tin clattered to the ground, stew splattering across the mud, biscuits crumbling underfoot. The noise cut through the chatter, heads turning as if on cue. "Oops," Wilkins drawled, releasing her with a mock apology, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the setup. Laughter erupted from his circle, harsh barking sounds that echoed off the ravine walls. "Clumsy today, eh? Better watch it, or you'll be scrubbing the lot after." Thompson hesitated, fork midway to his mouth, but joined the chorus to avoid the fallout. Davies looked away, uncomfortable, but said nothing. In the ranks, solidarity was a luxury, survival the rule. Elena knelt swiftly, retrieving the tray, her face impassive as she wiped it on her trousers. Mud streaked her sleeve where he'd gripped, the fabric damp and clinging, but she felt no sting, only the cold calculation of restraint. "Leave it, Vasquez. You'll get Hargrove's boot up your ass for wasting rations," Wilkins added, leaning back with arms crossed, the picture of casual authority. The platoon watched, the moment stretching a public test of her place. Hargrove glanced over from the maps, his expression flickering. Disapproval, perhaps, but no intervention. It was the way. Juniors sorted juniors, the chain unbroken. Elena rose, tray in hand, and walked to the field kitchen without a word, her posture rigid, steps measured. She scraped the mess into a bin, accepted a replacement portion with a nod to the server, a quiet lance corporal who averted his eyes, and returned to her seat. The laughter had died to snickers by then, the group turning back to their meals, the incident absorbed into the day's fabric. Wilkins shot her a triumphant look, but Elena met it with silence, her eyes steady over the rim of her mug. Internally the fire banked higher. Not rage, but resolve, the kind forged in isolation. She'd endured worse grabs, worse humiliations, in places where words could cost lives. Here, in the grey routine of Sennybridge, it was just another layer, another reminder of the barriers her size erected. She ate methodically, the stew tasteless on her tongue, the rain beginning to patter on the tarp above. As the break wound down, Hargrove's voice rose again. "Clear up! Weapons drill in 5. The platoon stirred, trays stacked, Bergens shouldered once more. Elena fell into line as they formed up, the grip mark on her sleeve hidden under her cuff, the mockery lingering like the scent of spilled food on the ground. Wilkins passed her with a smirk, but she didn't acknowledge it, her gaze fixed ahead, on the rising ground that led to the next phase. The beacons watched impassively, their slopes hiding secrets of their own, much like the woman who marched beneath them. The drill commenced on a flat stretch of turf, Hargrove demonstrating the fire positions. Prone, kneeling, standing, each transition a study in precision. Smoothly, you lot, no faffing about. Rifles cracked in dry fire. The platoon cycling through, boots scuffing the earth. Elena moved with fluid economy, her small frame dropping low, rifle steady as if an extension of her arm. Wilkins, paired opposite, fumbled his reload deliberately, ejecting the magazine too soon, drawing a sharp rebuke from Ellis. "Get it together, Lance Corporal." But the earlier triumph soured on Wilkins' face. Eleanor's silence had robbed him of the full victory. By the time the whistle blew for the afternoon tab, the tension had woven itself into the group's rhythm, subtle, unspoken, a crack in the order that no one named. The platoon shouldered loads and pressed on, the ravine falling behind, the path climbing toward the higher ground where the wind howled freer. Elena's steps remained even, her wrist a faint ache she ignored, her mind turning inward to the discipline that held her steady. Injustice was the army's shadow, cast long in the hierarchy's light, but she bore it with the quiet dignity of one who knew greater tests awaited. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The platoon crested the ridge, the path leveling into a broad plateau where the wind scoured the bracken flat, carrying the faint acrid tang of peat fires from distant farms. Sennybridge's training grounds unfolded below like a rumpled blanket, the Nissen huts of the base mere specks against the encroaching hills. Private Elena Vasquez adjusted her Bergen with a subtle roll of her shoulders, the afternoon tab demanding a quicker cadence now. Hargrove's orders had sharpened since the midday break, as if the sergeant's mood soured with the gathering clouds. The rain held off, but the air hung thick, mist coiling around ankles like smoke from a suppressed barrel. Corporal Ellis took point for this leg, his voice a low burr over the tramp of boots. "Keep it tight, sections," eyes on the man in front. The hierarchy reasserted itself seamlessly. Privates in the van, lance corporals sweeping the flanks, Hargrove bringing up the rear with that watchful stride that missed nothing. Eleanor fell into her slot midway, her rifle slung low, movements economical amid the group's laboured breaths. The incident at the trestle lingered unspoken. Wilkins' occasional glance her way carried a smug residue, but she'd met it with the same impassive front, her wrist now tucked under her sleeve to hide the faint red mark. Competence was her currency here, silence its vault. As the column wound down a shallow declivity toward a cluster of observation posts, an unfamiliar vehicle hummed into view. An unmarked Land Rover, its olive-drab paint dulled by mud splatter, pulling up on the track beside the drill area. The platoon slowed instinctively, Hargrove raising a hand to halt them short of the flat expanse used for live-fire simulations. From the vehicle emerged three figures, their silhouettes lean and unhurried against the grey sky. No fanfare. No salutes exchanged at distance. These were men who moved as if the ground itself adjusted to their presence. SAS, Elena noted without surprise, visiting assessors from Credenhill, here to observe the infantry's edge in the beacon's unforgiving terrain. The regiment's shadow fell long over training like this, their selections drawing from the army's best, or so the briefings went. The lead figure was a major, his beret tilted at that precise angle, face weathered like old leather. Captain Rhys Bowen, though ranks meant little in whispers about the regiment. Flanking him were two others, a warrant officer with the steady gaze of one who'd clocked more ops than most colonels, and a sergeant whose build spoke of quiet power, not bulk. They carried no ostentatious kit, just sidearms holstered low and Bergens stripped to essentials. Hargrove approached with a crisp salute, his posture snapping to attention. "Major, platoon's on the afternoon tab, weapons drill complete, heading to the range next." Bowen nodded once, his eyes scanning the ranks without expression, a survey, not a scrutiny. "Carry on, Sergeant Major. We'll shadow for the next phase." No elaboration, no questions. The SAS way was observation, not interference. The platoon reformed, the visitors falling in parallel to the column at a respectful remove, their steps silent on the turf. Elena felt the shift immediately. The air thickened, not with tension, but with an undercurrent of awareness. The lads straightened imperceptibly, banter dying as if under a sergeant's glare. Wilkins, marching abreast of her, shot a sidelong look at the trio, his earlier bravado muted. Even he knew the weight these men carried. Classified briefs from Hereford, missions that blurred lines between soldier and shadow. The path skirted a dry stream bed, the ground turning rocky underfoot, forcing careful foot placement. Elena navigated it without breaking stride, her boots finding holds amid the scree, a reflex from routes far harsher than this. As the group crested a low rise, the major's party drew closer, paralleling the platoon at the edge of the formation. Bowen walked with that measured economy, his warrant officer a pace behind, eyes flicking over the ranks like a sniper's scan. They spoke in low tones, words lost to the wind, but their attention settled on details. A private's sloppy sling, a lance corporal's uneven pacing. Hargrove kept formation tight, his occasional glance back inviting no comment. It was during the brief regroup at the range approach, a flat meadow pocked with target frames, that the first notice fell on Elena. The platoon grounded Bergens, rifles unslung for the live-fire run. Snapshots at 50 meters, then assault course integration. She knelt to check her SA-80, cycling the bolt with oiled precision, her small hands steady despite the chill seeping through her gloves. The wind tugged at her cuff as she adjusted the sight, exposing for a fraction of a second a faint mark on her inner wrist. Not the red from Wilkins' grip, but ink. A subtle tattoo, a coiled rope ladder against a mountain silhouette, half hidden by the fold of skin. It was old, faded, the sort inked in haste after a climb that tested souls. The warrant officer paused mid-step, his gaze catching the glimpse as Elena tugged her sleeve down. No exclamation, no point, just a subtle halt, his posture shifting, a fractional stillness, like a man recognizing a familiar signal in the fog. He murmured something to Bowen, too low for the platoon to hear, and the major's eyes followed, narrowing not in surprise, but recognition. Eleanor rose, snapping her rifle to port, oblivious or perhaps acutely aware, her face a mask of routine. She moved to her firing point, the line forming up under Ellis's directions. "Load and make safe. On my command." The first volley cracked out, sharp reports echoing off the hills, spent casings arcing into the grass. Elena's shots grouped tight, her stance low and unyielding, recoil absorbed without flinch. The SAS observers stood apart, arms folded, but Bowen's attention lingered on her form, the way she transitioned from prone to standing without wasted motion, a discipline that echoed the regiment's trials. The tattoo nagged at him. He'd seen its like before on a contractor pulled from a logistics pool during a Welsh exfil in the Peaks. Classified, a woman who'd hauled gear through blizzard conditions when the chain broke. But that was years back. buried in after-action reports from an op that never made headlines. As the drill shifted to the assault course, low crawls under wire, bounds over logs, Eleanor pulled ahead in her section, her slight frame slipping through obstacles with a fluidity that drew no cheers, only the quiet efficiency of survival. Wilkins, laboring behind, cursed under his breath as thorns snagged his kit, but she cleared the final barrier without pause, rifle up, scanning as if the targets breathed. The sergeant from the visiting party exchanged a glance with his warrant officer, a nod imperceptible to most. Hints accumulated. Her pacing on the tab earlier, matching the major's without strain, the way she scanned horizons, not just the path, a habit of those who'd walked perimeters in places without maps. Hargrove called time, the platoon collapsing into a ragged line for debrief. Breath fogged in the cooling air, the scent of cordite clinging to uniforms. Bowen approached then, not to the front, but halting near the flank where Elena stood, wiping her barrel cloth. "Solid work," he said, voice even, directed at the group but eyes on her. No names, no probes, just the stillness that spoke volumes in the regiment. Eleanor met his gaze briefly, level, reserved, before snapping to attention with the others. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her tone clipped, Midland's lilt softened by discipline. The major turned away, murmuring to his sergeant as they rejoined the Land Rover. "Reminds me of Snowdon, that one. The haul-out." The words drifted on the wind, faint but clear to Hargrove, who frowned but held his tongue. The platoon shouldered Bergens once more, the tab resuming toward the evening's bivouac, but the observer's presence lingered like the mist, a quiet intrusion into the routine. Elena marched on, her tattoo concealed again, the past a shadow she carried alone. Yet in the rigid lines of the formation, something stirred, observation turning to intrigue. The hierarchy's edges blurring under the gaze of men who knew silence's depth. The beacons darkened as the light faded, the wind whispering through the gorse, carrying the platoon deeper into the training's heart. Unseen threads began to pull, subtle as a sniper's breath. The platoon trudged into the bivouac site as dusk settled over the beacons, the sky a bruised palette of indigo and slate, the wind carrying the chill bite of impending frost. Sennybridge's outer ranges lay behind them now, the ground leveling into a shallow basin ringed by cairns and scattered boulders, the sort of spot chosen for its exposure, testing resolve under the stars. Tents were pitched in orderly rows, guy ropes taut against the gusts, the faint glow of headlamps flickering as sections claimed their plots. Private Elena Vasquez worked methodically, hammering pegs into the peaty soil with the flat of her entrenching tool, her movements precise despite the ache settling into her limbs from the day's tab. The Bergen lay unpacked beside her, contents sorted by rote. Ground sheet first, then sleeping bag rolled tight. Sergeant Major Hargrove oversaw the setup from a central vantage, his silhouette etched against the fading light, barking adjustments to stragglers. "Tarp secure, no flapping about like washing on the line." Corporal Ellis moved among the tents, checking lashings, his nods of approval sparse but firm. The hierarchy held firm even here, in the bivouac's enforced intimacy. Privates laboring at the base tasks, lance corporals coordinating, Hargrove's gaze the final arbiter. Wilkins lounged near his section's fire pit, directing Thompson and Davies with half-hearted gestures, his earlier smugness dulled by fatigue but not extinguished. He shot Elena a glance as she tightened her ridgeline, the corner of his mouth twitching. A remnant of the trestle's humiliation, waiting for another chance to land. The SAS observers had lingered, their Land Rover parked at the site's perimeter, engines ticking cool under the tarp. Major Bowen and his warrant officer stood apart, conferring in low tones with Hargrove, maps unrolled on the bonnet. The sergeant had peeled off to inspect the platoon's perimeter sentries, his presence a quiet pressure that kept the lads on edge. No one approached them unbidden. The regiment's aura was its own command, drawing eyes without demand. Elena avoided their direction, focusing on her task, the wind tugging at her cuff to reveal that faint tattoo once more before she adjusted it. The mark itched faintly, a ghost of ink from a night in a forward operating base, inked in the dim light of a headlamp after the extraction. But that was another life. sealed away. As the setup neared completion, Hargrove called the platoon to assembly, a debrief circle around the central fire, flames crackling low in a ring of stones, casting long shadows across upturned faces. "Form up! Evening brief, then stand to rotations." The men gathered, rifles grounded, sitting on burgans or the damp earth, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and boiled rations from the field kitchen. Elena took her place on the fringe, knees drawn up slightly, her posture straight amid the slouch of the others. Wilkins settled nearby, knees splayed, his boot nudging hers accidentally as he shifted, a petty echo of the midday grab, drawing a muffled snicker from Thompson. She didn't react. Eyes on the fire's glow, the warmth a brief respite against the encroaching cold. Hargrove stood at the circle's head, Ellis to his side, the SAS trio forming a loose triangle behind them. Bowen central, warrant officer and sergeant flanking like silent sentinels. The major's face was impassive, etched by firelight, but his attention swept the group with that measured scan, lingering fractions longer on Elena. The debrief began routinely. Pace assessments, kit critiques, the sergeant's voice clipping through the points like a well-oiled bolt. Sections 2 and 4 dragged on the assault course. Tighten up tomorrow. Nods rippled through the ranks, murmurs of agreement. Wilkins piped up then, seizing the opening, his tone laced with false concern. "What about Vasquez, Sarge? She nearly wiped out on the wire, kept us all waiting." Laughter stirred again, low and knowing, Thompson joining with a cough that masked his chuckle. Davies shifted uncomfortably, eyes on his boots. The circle's eyes turned to Elena, expectant, the mockery a public thread pulling taut once more. She remained still, gaze fixed on the flames, her silence a wall. Hargrove's brow furrowed slightly, but he moved on, dismissing the jab with a grunt. "Focus on your own form, Lance Corporal." The brief continued, rotations assigned, Elena on first watch, her section paired with Wilkins for the patrol. As Hargrove wrapped up, Bowen stepped forward unannounced, his movement drawing every head like a magnet. No dramatic pause, no raised voice. Just the quiet authority that stilled the circle, the fire's pop the only sound. "One addition to the brief," he said, voice even, carrying the flat vowels of mid-Wales, honed in Hereford's halls. His eyes settled on Elena, not probing, but certain, a recognition passing unspoken. The major gestured to her wrist with a subtle nod, the firelight catching the edge of her sleeve. "Private Vasquez, that mark. Snowdon 18, wasn't it? The rope ladder on the north face." The words landed softly, but they rippled outward, freezing the circle. Gasps were stifled, Wilkins' smirk evaporating into slack-jawed stare. Eleanor's posture stiffened imperceptibly, her eyes meeting Bowen's. Steady, reserved, the first crack in her armor. She nodded once, fractionally, the admission silent but absolute. The warrant officer shifted, his stillness amplifying the moment. While the sergeant stood unmoving, arms folded, Bowen continued, tone clipped, for the group's ears alone. "Classified extract. Blizzard hit hard. 8 miles down from the summit, op compromised. Our operator went down, leg shattered on the traverse. Logistics chain snapped, no helo till dawn. You were the contractor on site. Pulled him out solo, Bergen on your back, his weight across yours. Carried him through whiteout, no comms, no backup. Saved the team's flank." The revelation unfolded without flourish, facts laid bare like a debrief report. No heroics, just the dry recounting of what the regiment knew intimately. Whispers erupted then, hushed and urgent. "No effing way," from Thompson, the words slipping out before he clamped his mouth. Wilkins paled, his boot withdrawing as if burned. The circle held its breath. The fire's glow illuminating faces shifted from mockery to awe. Subtle, internal, the British way. Hargrove's eyes widened fractionally, respect dawning in the lines of his face. Bowen didn't salute, didn't proclaim, instead he snapped to attention. A precise click of heels on the earth, his warrant officer mirroring it a beat later. The sergeant inclined his head, the gesture carrying the weight of shared silence. Elena rose slowly, her small frame straightening to match them, chin level, eyes locking with the major's in that reserved exchange, posture speaking what words withheld. Shame spread through the ranks like mist, Wilkins' gaze dropping, the hierarchy's barbs exposed as frail. The moment stretched, the beacon's wind whispering through the tents, the platoon frozen in the fire's circle. No cheers, no outburst, just the quiet transformation, respect rising unbidden. Bowen broke the stance first, nodding to Hargrove. "Carry on." He turned toward the Land Rover, his party following, but the air hummed with the unspoken. Elena's past no longer hidden, her competence etched now in the regiment's indelible ink. She stood a beat longer, the weight of eyes upon her lighter than any Bergen, the silence her true command. As the debrief dissolved into rotations, the platoon stirred, whispers changing tone, admiration threading through the night air. Elena shouldered her rifle for watch, steps measured, the cold no longer biting quite so deep. In the rigid world of ranks, revelation had realigned the lines, honor claimed not in noise, but in the steady burn of truth. The night deepened over the bivouac. The beacon's peaks etched black against a starless sky, the wind a low moan through the guy ropes that tugged at the tents like insistent fingers. The fire's embers glowed faintly now, casting erratic shadows across the circle of faces, each one etched with the weight of the revelation. Private Elena Vasquez stood unmoving, her rifle cradled in the crook of her arm, the cold seeping through her jacket to settle in her bones. Major Bowen's words hung in the air like cordite after a shot, undeniable, unembellished, pulling her past into the harsh light of the present. The platoon remained frozen, the usual shuffle of boots and murmurs stilled, as if the ground itself held its breath. Bowen held his attention stance a moment longer, his posture rigid, the lines of his face illuminated by the dying flames. Then, with the precision of a man who drilled such gestures into instinct, he raised his hand in salute. Crisp, formal, the fingertips brushing the peak of his beret. His warrant officer followed suit, the motion synchronous, a silent echo that amplified the gesture without a word. The sergeant inclined his head once more, deeper this time, his eyes locking with Elena's in that reserved acknowledgement, reserved for those who'd shared the regiment's shadows. No fanfare, no raised voices, just the quiet formality that spoke of debts repaid in silence. "Echo," Bowen said then, his voice low but carrying. The old call sign slipping out like a classified code unlocked. It was the handle they'd given her during that Snowdon extract, short for the faint echo of her radio bursts through the blizzard, the only lifeline in the whiteout. Elena's breath caught fractionally, the sound of it lost to the wind, but her eyes met his steadily, the recognition passing between them like a shared perimeter check. No one else in the circle knew its full weight, but the utterance landed with the impact of a confirmed sighting, transformative, binding her not as Private Vasquez, the underestimated figure in the ranks, but as the woman who'd bridged the impossible. Hargrove snapped to mirror the salute, his hand rising sharp against the night, the sergeant's face a mask of dawning respect that smoothed the habitual furrows of command. Corporal Ellis followed, his wiry frame straightening, the nod he gave Elena carrying the quiet apology of oversight. The platoon stirred then, not in chaos, but in a ripple of emulation, Thompson's hand fumbling to his beret, Davies rising to his feet with uncharacteristic poise, even the younger privates shifting to attention, as the gesture propagated through the ranks. Wilkins remained seated, his face drained of color, the smug residue of the day's barbs curdling into something sharper, shame raw and internal, twisting in the pit of his stomach. He averted his eyes, staring into the embers, the laughter from the trestle echoing hollow in his mind now, exposed as the frail posturing it had always been. The circle held like that for what felt an eternity. Those seconds only passed, the base in this pocket of the beacons freezing under the weight of the moment. The wind carried the faint scent of peat smoke and damp wool, the only movement the subtle shift of shadows as the fire settled. Shame spread through the group like mist rolling down the slopes, Thompson's shoulders sagging with the regret of his complicity, Davies' gaze flickering with unspoken solidarity he'd withheld too long. Even Hargrove's stance softened imperceptibly, the rigid hierarchy bending under the truth of Elena's hidden competence, not the brash heroism of tales, but the quiet endurance that had saved lives in the regiment's unforgiving fold. Bowen dropped his salute first, the motion deliberate, turning to Hargrove with a nod that sealed the reform. "She's one of yours now, Sergeant Major." Treat her as such." The words were clipped, professional, carrying no rebuke but implying volumes, the institutional respect now etched into the platoon's ledger. Hargrove lowered his hand, his voice gruff as he addressed the group. "You heard the Major. Stand down, but remember this." No lecture followed. In the British way, the silence sufficed, allowing the lesson to embed itself through posture and glance rather than proclamation. The assembly broke gradually, men rising to their rotations with subdued steps, the clatter of kit muted as if in a cathedral. Eleanor shouldered her rifle, the weight familiar, and moved toward the perimeter without a word, her small frame cutting through the night with renewed purpose. Whispers followed her, not the mocking barbs of before, but hushed tones laced with awe. Echo carried him 8 miles. From a private near the tents, the story already weaving into the fabric of the bivouac. Wilkins lingered by the fire, alone now, his boots scuffing the earth as he processed the reversal. The Lance Corporal's authority diminished in the shadow of her unspoken legacy. As the first watch took position, the SAS party withdrew to their Land Rover, engines humming to life with a low rumble that faded into the darkness. Bowen cast one last glance toward the perimeter, where Elena patrolled, her silhouette steady against the cairns, before the vehicle pulled away. The platoon settled into the night's routine, tents zipped against the chill, sentries posted with rifles at the ready, but the air had changed, charged with a subtle transformation. Respect rose unbidden, threading through the ranks like the first light over the beacons. Hargrove's brief to Ellis carried a new deference when mentioning her section. Thompson offered a quiet "well done" as he passed her post, the words heavy with amends. Elena walked her beat alone, the cold air crisp on her face, the tattoo on her wrist a faint warmth beneath her sleeve. The Snowdon memory surfaced unbidden, the howl of the gale, the operator's weight across her shoulders. Each step a negotiation with exhaustion and ice. But here, in the quiet tension of Sennybridge, that past had found its echo, reforming the lines around her. No one grabbed sleeves now. The mockery had evaporated into the night, replaced by the reserved nods of soldiers who understood moral courage's quiet cost. The hierarchy endured, but Elena's place within it had shifted, elevated not by noise, but by the steady honor of recognition. By midnight, the camp lay still, the wind whispering through the bracken, carrying the promise of dawn's routine. From that firelit circle onward, Private Vasquez became more than the small woman in the line. She was the quiet legend, her dignity a beacon in the army's unyielding grey. British discipline demanded restraint, but in its depths, silent honor bound them all tighter than any chain of command. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. Dawn broke over the bivouac with the reluctant clarity of a Welsh winter, the first light filtering through the mist like smoke from a suppressed rifle. The beacons stood sentinel, their slopes dusted with frost that crunched under boot as the platoon stirred from uneasy sleep. Private Elena Vasquez rose before the bugle, folding her sleeping bag with the same precision she'd applied to every task since arrival, methodical, unhurried, her small frame silhouetted against the paling sky. The air carried the sharp tang of frozen earth and lingering wood smoke, the night's revelations settling into the camp like dew on the tents. Hargrove's voice pierced the quiet at first call, softer in timbre than the days prior, though no less commanding. "On your feet, all ranks, strike camp, double time." No emphasis on the words, but the platoon responded with a new alacrity, sections forming without the usual grumbles. Eleanor shouldered her Bergen, the straps familiar grooves on her shoulders, and joined the line as the tents came down in a symphony of snaps and folds. Corporal Ellis moved among them, his nods more frequent, lingering a beat on her section as if recalibrating the chain. The hierarchy remained, privates at the base, lance corporals directing, Hargrove's oversight absolute. But the undercurrents had shifted. The mockery evaporated into the frost. As the column reformed for the return tab to Sennybridge, Wilkins fell in at the rear, his steps measured, eyes averted from Elena's position midway up. No nudges, no sly remarks. The lance corporal's posture carried the weight of introspection. his usual bark reduced to terse orders for Thompson and Davies. The pair exchanged glances with Elena as they passed rations, Thompson's hand steadying hers briefly in the exchange, a silent amends wrapped in the foil packet. "Solid watch last night," he murmured, voice low, the words carrying more than the night's patrol. She nodded once, her response a fractional incline of the head, the reserved exchange sealing the truce without fanfare. The march back wound through the valleys, the ground slick with melt, boots striking a rhythm that echoed the platoon's altered pulse. Conversation flowed in pockets, but the tone had changed. Whispers no longer laced with derision, but threaded with quiet recounting. 8 miles in a blizzard. No backup, Davies said to a cluster of privates, his Geordie accent hushed as if reciting from a classified brief. Heads turned subtly, eyes flicking to Elena's steady stride ahead, her Bergen balanced without strain. She felt the shift, the weight of observation lighter now, transformed from burden to badge. No one approached her directly. In the British way, respect manifested in space afforded, in the absence of barbs that once defined her days. Hargrove set a brisk pace, but pauses came more readily, at stream crossings for water, at rises for formation checks, allowing the group to breathe, to absorb. During one such halt, Ellis pulled Eleanor aside briefly, his voice even under the canopy of gorse. "Major Bowen left a note for your file, Private. Commendation, backdated. No elaboration, no praise heaped, just the fact, delivered with the clipped efficiency of routine admin." Elena's posture remained straight, her eyes meeting his steadily. "Understood, Corporal." The words sufficed, the institutional nod embedding her legacy into the rank's formal record. From that moment, her evaluations would carry the echo of Snowdon, the quiet competence elevated to something enduring. By midday, the base's outline emerged through the lifting mist, the drill squares cracked tarmac, the low barracks with their olive paint peeling under perpetual damp. The platoon crossed the threshold with a collective sigh, Bergens dropped in the armory under Hargrove's watchful eye. Inspection followed in the mess hall, the air warm with the scent of stew and fresh-baked bread from the cookhouse, a stark contrast to the beacon's austerity. As trays were filled, the dynamic unfolded anew. Wilkins queued behind Elena without intrusion, his tray balanced at a distance, the grab from days past a ghost unspoken. When a younger private jostled forward accidentally, he corrected himself with uncharacteristic haste, muttering, "Sorry, Vasquez," the apology slipping out like frost under sun. The meal proceeded in relative quiet, the clink of cutlery punctuating subdued talk of leave rotas and next week's exercises. Whispers circled Elena now, respectful fragments. Heard she was logistics but regiment level, from one table, saved their op single-handed, from another. She ate methodically. Her posture unchanged, but the isolation of before had dissolved, replaced by an invisible buffer of regard. Thompson slid onto the bench opposite, uninvited but welcome, offering a biscuit from his ration. "Fair play," he said simply, the Midlands shorthand, carrying the weight of conversion. Eleanor accepted with a nod, the exchange bridging the gap silence had once enforced. Afternoon brought kit maintenance in the squadron lines, rifles stripped on benches under the harsh fluorescence, the smell of solvent sharp in the air. Hargrove patrolled the rows, his critiques measured, fewer for Elena's section, his gaze lingering on her disassembly with a grunt of approval that bordered on endorsement. "Clean work, Vasquez." The words were sparse, but in the sergeant's lexicon they rang like a commendation medal. Wilkins across the aisle worked in silence, his polished strokes deliberate, the lance corporal's ambitions tempered by the mirror held to his own conduct. No one mocked the small woman now. Her frame, once a target, stood as testament to the deception of appearances in the army's unyielding world. As evening fell, the parade square emptied under a sky clearing to stars, the cold air crisp with the promise of frost. Elena stood at ease during the final roll call, her name called with the same rhythm, but Hargrove's present echoed back with a subtle pause, acknowledgement woven into the routine. The platoon dispersed to barracks, the day's transformation settling like the night's quiet, whispers evolving into legends murmured in bunks, Eleanor's story threading through the base like the beacon's hidden streams. From that bivouac fire onward, Private Vasquez became the quiet legend of Sennybridge, not proclaimed in bulletins or bars, but etched in the reserved nods of comrades, the averted eyes of those who'd erred. No one grabbed sleeves or upended trays. The injustice of before yielded to moral courage's subtle reign. In the rigid hierarchy of the British Army, where orders bound tighter than wire, her hidden past had reformed the lines, proving that silent honor, born through blizzard and banter alike, outlasted any chain of command. The regiment's shadow lingered, a reminder that true discipline lay not in volume, but in the steady reserve that defined them all. Weeks turned to months in the steady grind of Sennybridge, the Brecon beacon's relentless weather etching deeper lines into the landscape, and the soldiers who trained upon it. The frost of that revelatory night had long melted into the spring's tentative green, but its echo lingered in the platoon's routines like the faint scar of a healed wound. Private Elena Vasquez moved through the days unchanged in form, her small stature still swallowed by the combat jacket, her steps measured on the drill square's cracked tarmac. But the air around her had shifted, subtle as the first thaw. No longer the overlooked figure at the rank's edge. She carried an unspoken authority, her silence now a mantle rather than a shield. The hierarchy endured, as it must in the British Army's unyielding frame. Roll calls at dawn, the clipped cadence of Hargrove's commands slicing through the mist. Inspections in the armory where rifles gleamed under the harsh lights, the scent of gun oil mingling with damp wool. Yet the barbs had vanished, replaced by a reserved deference that manifested in small gestures, a space left open at the trestle during mess, Thompson's nod of greeting as they queued for rations, the bully beef hash steaming in tin trays. Wilkins, promoted to full corporal in the reshuffle, kept his distance, his orders delivered with a new precision, devoid of the old venom. During a kit check one drizzling morning, he paused at Elena's Bergen, prodding the straps with uncharacteristic care. "All secure, Private," he said, voice even, eyes meeting hers briefly before moving on. No apology uttered. In the ranks, amends came through conduct, not confession. Hargrove's oversight evolved too, his gruff appraisals carrying a thread of endorsement. On a tab through the upper reaches of the beacons, where the wind howled off Fanny Big like an ill-tempered sergeant, he assigned Elena to lead a section, her pace unflagging, navigating the boggy paths with the quiet certainty of one who'd charted worse in whiteout. "Good line, Vasquez," he grunted at the halt, the words sparse but weighted, drawing nods from Ellis and the others. The platoon followed without question, their boots echoing hers in unison, the earlier mockery transmuted into the steady rhythm of trust. Whispers persisted in the barracks after lights out, the low hum of tales retold around the iron bunks, the glow of contraband cigs piercing the dark. "Echo," they called her. 8 miles, no fuss. Davy's voice, hushed from the upper bunk, carried the legend forward, not in exaggeration, but in the dry facts that bound it to truth. Institutional respect embedded itself deeper, threading through the base's formal veins. A commendation arrived quietly in Elena's file, backdated to Snowdon 18, the paperwork stamped with Hereford's discreet seal. No fanfare, just the elevation of her clearance for advanced drills. She joined observer rotations on SAS-linked exercises, her input solicited in briefings where majors like Bowen might appear unannounced, their presence a nod to shared history. During one such session in the ops room, maps unrolled across scarred tables smelling of tea and marker ink. Bowen caught her eye across the room. "Solid input, Echo," he murmured as the group dispersed, the call sign a private bridge over the years. Elena inclined her head, posture straight, the exchange sealed in the clipped professionalism that defined the regiment. The transformation rippled outward, beyond Sennybridge's wire. Word filtered through the Army's quiet networks, whispers in Aldershot's mess halls, nods in Hereford's shadowed corridors, elevating Elena to a figure of moral courage. Her story a cautionary thread against the injustice that festered in rigid orders. No public bulletins marked it, the British way-shunned spectacle, favouring the internal shift where respect rose through posture and silence. Young privates straightened in her wake, emulating the reserved dignity she'd embodied all along. Even Hargrove. In a rare moment over evening tea in the sergeant's mess, the steam curling from mugs chipped by years of use, remarked to Ellis, "Vasquez, proves size is bollocks. It's the steel inside." The words hung, unadorned, a reflection on the discipline that valued quiet resolve over bluster. Elena herself remained unaltered in essence, her past a compartment firmly shut once more. Nights in the barracks, she lay on her bunk, the distant rumble of lorries on the A40 a lullaby, her mind tracing the Snowdon traverse not in triumph, but in the simple ledger of duty done. The tattoo on her wrist, faded further under the cuff's rub, served as anchor, a reminder that hidden burdens, when revealed, reformed not just lines but lives. She mentored subtly now, a word to a struggling private on rifle grip, a steadying hand during a fumbling pack check, her competence a quiet beacon in the hierarchy's grey. By summer's cusp, as the beacons bloomed with heather under rare sun, the platoon stood on the parade square for a passing-out review. Elena formed up in the rear rank, beret squared, chin level, the wind carrying the faint salt of the distant 7. Hargrove's inspection passed her with a pause, his eyes meeting hers in that fractional salute of glance. No words exchanged. The respect was etched, institutional and enduring. As the company marched off, boots striking the tarmac in perfect cadence, the base's routines resumed. The cold Hereford rain of memory metaphorically mirrored in the Welsh drizzle. But Elena's legend persisted, a testament to the moral courage that tested orders against right. In the British Army's world of quiet tension and rigid order, where boots echoed through parade squares and cold air sharpened resolve, Elena Vasquez embodied the silent honor that bound them. Injustice yielded to recognition, not through clamor but through the subtle dignity of truth unveiled. Discipline demanded restraint, yet in its core such stories wove the unbreakable thread of legacy, proving that one act, born in blizzard or banter, could realign the unyielding chain. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Elena Vasquez. See you in the next one.